Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Salem Athenaeum and to this very special concert, part of our series of Music Could Talk. We call it that because in this room here, in addition to having great acoustics, we have the opportunity where you could have kind of almost a group conversation and have some exchanges, some questions with the musician, and we'll be doing that. So he'll say some words about what he's playing, and then we'll have an opportunity in the middle to just have a little bit of dialogue. So I want to just tell you, there's a lot of stuff that goes on here in the Athenaeum, and I want to just tell you a couple of things that are coming up. We've got a short course on story writing. Goes for the Thursdays in October. Bobby Lerman is the instructor. If you've ever wanted to write fiction, and I know some of you have, then this is a chance. You can sign up for this course and come here. It's held here on Thursday evenings. October 30th, Charlotte Gordon, a wonderful author, a winner of the National Book Award, will be here to talk about her new book, which is about Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley. It's a great book. She's a wonderful author, wonderful speaker. I do recommend that. And then we have something called The Language of Light with Gerald Shea, who has experienced and also has studied what happens now that there are new technologies to restore hearing to people who have either been congenitally without it or have lost it very early in life. What is that like? Is that something that even should be done, and what happens, and how is that experienced by people? It's again, a very interesting topic. That's on November 7th. So there's a person who is co-sponsoring this with us, and that's Richard Guérin of Salem Classical, and I'm going to let him introduce the artist.
Can I just see very quickly, how many people here, other than you guys, I know you, have been to a Salem Classical concert? Oh good, there's some cross-pollination. I only ask that not for the reason you think, but so often organizations just simply don't want to get along with one another. They're protective of their mailing list, they're protective of their donors, and that's a reason why as you might think that there'd be some cooperation, there often isn't. And so when I talked to Josiah about this, it was just nothing but positivity and openness and welcoming, and so it was a thrill. I don't want to talk, we're going to do some talking after the first two pieces Matt plays, including talking about the composers and the music, and there's a lot to say there, so I won't go on about that, but I wanted to mention a couple of things that are coming up because, again, in that spirit of cooperation, there's a lot going on, and so I don't present the Boston Artists Ensemble in Hamilton Hall, but I want everybody here who might be a prospective music lover to know that these concerts are happening. So they just already had their first concert. Our next Salem Classical concert actually is next weekend, and Matt is playing some Philip Glass this weekend tonight, and that's interesting. And this is our fourth season of Salem Classical, and so far I've resisted programming any Philip Glass. That wouldn't be exceptional except for the fact that he's my boss. So I haven't told him that I have never played any Philip Glass, but I told him Matt was here tonight. We've already had a great day. We were over at the Witch House. Imagine playing Bach and Philip Glass and Isang Yun in a room from 1642. I mean, it was just really thrilling. But so we're getting a little bit more Glass next weekend with this exceptional Steinway artist, the pianist Jenny Lin. We found an amazing Steinway piano at the Tabernacle Church. I hope you'll join us for that. And we got many other things. Just look at salemclassical.com and you'll find it out. I just wanted to say, well, this is another ground. I won't ask you any more questions, but we actually got Philip Glass to come here last June. And it was a special event because Philip Glass had written this major piece for solo cello, which lay on his shelf for 7 years unplayed, and I knew why that was, and it kind of came out at the end of the concert. Matt prompted Philip to say why it was, but basically he wrote it for a girl, and then they broke up, and so it lay there. We recorded it and we released the album. And I told everybody in the crowd that night, I said, the premiere has to happen tonight because I put in the liner notes that the premiere was happening in Salem, Massachusetts in June 2017. Now, so as remarkable as that was, if any one of you saw the New Yorker profile on Matt reuniting with his cello last week, in the New Yorker last week, you know, there's an intimate relationship between the musicians and their instruments. So when he played it in Salem last year, he played it on not his real instrument. So it didn't count at all. So tonight he's playing it on his real instrument. And under normal circumstances, I'm telling you, we get into it, Matt is an exceptional artist, and under normal circumstances, we're just so incredibly lucky to have him. So please join me in welcoming Matt Haimovitz.
Good evening. Thank you for trusting us with the menu tonight. To back announce, you might not have known which one is which, but in fact I started with Philip Glass and followed it up with Bach. But Philip's piece was actually a commission for a project a couple of years ago, overtures to Bach. I commissioned 6 composers to write a kind of prelude for each of the Bach cello suites and engage them. And Philip's overture is the most Bach-like, I would say. I mean, he really uses similar techniques to the Bach to establish, you know, the idea that a single voice instrument like this can actually sustain several voices at once. And unlike the Bach prelude that I played for you, with the exception of the last chord that, you know, is written as 3 notes played simultaneously. In fact, it's very horizontally notated. But there are 3 voices going on, and with Philip, he sort of uses more double stops, so maybe that's like he goes a little further than Bach in that way, but it also creates this sense of several voices happening concurrently. So, and the Bach prelude was the very first suite of Bach, which probably many of you recognize. I'm not sure what the format is here. I could just keep talking and playing.
No,
are there specific things that we want to talk about here? Or how do we go ahead?
Oh, okay. It's just you and I all.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Okay.
You know, I find it hard to believe as I see this. We were talking about this earlier. That it's the manuscript of Anna Magdalena Bach who copied it. I find it hard to believe you need to look at the music at this point.
I didn't look at that. But it's a bit. Well, I mean, in this town you have, you know, some history, and I mean, in this room, you know, it's nice to go back to the text, to the, you know, and especially there's so much mystery around the Bach cello suites. We don't really know. I mean, it must have been a really great cellist who he was writing for in Köthen. He was writing for the court. It was a period in his life where you know. He could write whatever he dreamed up. He didn't have to write for it was the only period in his life where he didn't have to write for the church. So, and unfortunately, we don't have his own handwriting. We don't have his own manuscript. But what we do have is his second wife, Anna Magdalena, who copied for him and who has kind of uncanny resemblance in her handwriting to Bach's own.
It's probably really helpful.
Well, it's helpful, and I just find it as close as I can get. I can talk to Philip, but I can't talk to Johann Sebastian. So for me, this is as close as I can get. I like to have it in front of me. It makes me feel like I'm.
Because in fact, the other thing you're not seeing is that he's also playing from Philip Glass's, a scan of Philip Glass's manuscript.
Well, that's because that's all I got. Philip didn't publish it.
Yeah,
so.
right, yeah. But I remember when you get, it's so funny, it's just a lot of different things. I was thinking about you being reunited with your cello, and I talked to you as you were driving down, and you were just pulling your hair. I mean, you were really nervous about that. But I also remember when you did a radio interview in Ottawa or something.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're on the air, and you said, just this minute, Philip Glass emailed me a piece. But it's only funny because I'm on the other side, I'm on the business side. I talked to his publisher, and I said, oh, did you know Matt Haimovitz is premiering this new piece? This is his own publisher, his own employee. He said, no, we had no idea.
Well, I had no idea it would even arrive in time for the premiere because I had commissioned, Philip was the first phone call that I made of the 6 composers, thinking that he would be the busiest and the hardest one to nail down. And he gave me, he just mentored me through the process actually. He gave me very good advice. He said, just make sure that all 6 composers get paid the same amount of money for the commission. And then you can afford me that way, if you give a limit. But, and he said he would do it right away. There was no hesitation, and this music is so important to him, the Bach cello suites, and he right away was enthusiastic about it. But his came in last. He was busy, and he was right. He was working on some revisions for the opera at Washington National. What was the name?
Appomattox.
Appomattox. And in fact, the manuscript copy that I'm using is in fact one side, the back side is from Appomattox that he crossed out. And so I've never actually talked to him about this, but my theory is that because every week I would call him and say, Philip, how's the solo piece coming? And he said, oh yeah, I'm thinking about it. It's on the way. And then finally, sort of a week before the official premiere in New York, I called him and I said, I could use the score because I kind of need to look at it a little bit before. And so my theory is that he was working on the opera. He took that page, crossed it out, and then he described, when I talked to him about it, I played it for him, and he described it as, for him, it was as simple as writing a letter. So beautiful, and that's exactly, for him it's so organic and so natural, and it just flooded. I imagine he took him.
But it's just like anyone else. It's a flashback in time because he was in 2013 he was writing 2 operas. He's written 25 operas, and he was writing 2 operas simultaneously. One about the death of Walt Disney, and this other one in German, and for the opening of a new opera house. And he still writes by hand, and so it has to go into a computer. Some 25-year-old Yale graduate just takes it and enters it into the computer. But he was so enthused while doing that, and I said, what's going on? And he said, I now know why Bach had 20 children. You can get a lot done if these kids are in there copying his stuff. But I remember I remember when he wrote this because I asked him. I said, oh, how's it going? And he said, oh, it's done. I sent it to Matt. And I said, what's it like? He said, well, it's this is his view now. He said it's an overture prelude for the Bach G major suite. And I said, yeah, can you describe it? He said, you go into every key except for G major. He said, everything's in there except for G major.
Yeah, but he's got such strong instincts. He starts on E, actually, and ends on E. And that's actually one of my favorite harmonies that Bach travels to after the initial, because Bach is sort of, he's got these open strings and the resonance of the instrument, it just rings. But then very quickly he moves into E minor. It pivots that open G string. That's sort of my favorite note of the whole prelude. So he somehow picked it out, as a pitch center. I don't.
You guys should move closer. It's much better when you have 6 inches. Well, as I do spend. Actually, I get paid to talk about Philip Glass for a living. You know, music, and I was thinking about this today, history and music and everything is a circle. It's not, you know, the piece that you'll hear next is by a Korean composer named Isang Yun, and whom I had never heard of.
I'm curious how many people in this room have ever heard of Isang Yun, the composer?
I had neither, and Matt had neither.
2 years ago, I did not know who he was, and I'm sure this is the Salem premiere of this next piece.
Well, it's funny you say that because my first concert at Salem Classical was at Old Town Hall in September 2015, and on the program we did the four-hand piano version of The Rite of Spring, and I billed it as the Salem premiere of The Rite of Spring because I can't imagine it was ever done in Salem. But Isang Yun, it's an incredible story. I mean, you can't even make a movie. It's, from what I know about him, and I learned a little bit reading about him online, but I also talked to Frank Terry at the American Music Center. I don't even New Music USA nowadays. About as far deeply entrenched a sort of Western German composer in many ways, you would think. I mean,
he very early on he became very well. I mean, just completely immersed in Schoenbergian serial 12-tone. It suited his purposes for what he wanted to do musically, because very early on he wanted to bring in Eastern pentatonic influences and also Eastern timbres, but in terms of the pitch idea, it was very useful to him to kind of enter that Schoenbergian.
But there's nothing, I mean, from what I know about it, actually, a double album came out last night on which Matt plays his violin concerto and the piece that you're about to hear. And definitely in this piece here, you can feel some of those more Eastern elements, but they're not that far away from sort of the more exotic areas that Western composers have gone. But this is all very interesting in itself. But the really interesting part about his story is that at one point as a South Korean, he did a concert in North Korea. He was born in 1917, but this is after the war. Really, it seems his most productive years were the 50s, 60s, 70s. But he did a concert in the North, but he lived in Berlin. I feel like I'm ignoring people. So. He lived in Berlin, and the South Korean government went to Germany and kidnapped him.
Well, so he was living in Berlin. He studied in Berlin. He taught at the university in Berlin. I think he was always politically active. I mean, by their standards, they're an activist in the sense of he really believed in one Korea. He really believed that North Korea should have access to music and to classical music from Bach, Mozart, Beethoven through to his own music. And for him, it was just natural to go there. And in the late 1960s, the South Korean government was just insecure about some of these. There were a bunch of these expats actually living abroad, and apparently they rounded up 20 or so of them and kidnapped. I mean, they kidnapped Isang Yun from Berlin. The South Korean government did. Brought him back to...
Tortured him.
Well, they tortured him. They sentenced him to death. They... yeah, I mean, 3 years.
And it was years, and it was only by virtue of a petition on which people like Igor Stravinsky and Herbert von Karajan signed. Elliott Carter.
Leonard Bernstein, yeah.
To get him out. And they got him out.
They got him out in 1969, and then he wrote this piece that I'm going to play for you in 1970. So this is 1 year after he was imprisoned. The music became very autobiographical, I would say, after this experience.
Well, I was my office here in Salem. By the way, I love being in Salem every day for a lot of different reasons. But my office is it's in the Bowditch. I say Bowditch. The Bowditch. You cannot be right with Bowditch. But anyway, I'm right above historic Salem, and the woman who runs historic Salem right now, she graduated from NEC in voice, and I can't help, this is what I do all day. I started talking about Isang Yun, and I talked about the sort of the moment of time we're in right now, I listened to Matt's recording about 3 times in the past 24 hours of the cello concerto, and that's what I say. It's that we're all in this tiny circle where no matter how far you get to an extreme, the moment in time right now, what I'm trying to say is I feel this thing that's deeply connected to music that channels pain and anger and things like that. And she took it and put it into a few words. She said, oh, from World War I and World War II, is that why all the music in the 20th century is so ugly and horrible? And I laughed and I said, yeah.
Stravinsky said it very well. He said, music makes order out of chaos. And on first listen, when you hear this piece, you're going to think it's chaos. And the cello concerto, I would say, even more so. For me, when I first heard it, it was so chaotic. I loved it so much for its chaos. That's what drew me to it. But it's not unlike watching a judicial hearing for Supreme Court nomination. But in any case, no, but it's unbelievably organized, in fact, and everything is notated, even when I don't quite make it to the pitch that I'm going to. It's not a mistake on my part, hopefully. It's actually, he notates, he has his own notation for sort of reaching for certain notes, but not quite reaching their full center. And this is very symbolic for him, especially with certain key pitch areas, like the high A. This particular A, for Isang Yun, this is for him the symbol of unity and the two Koreas back as one nation and sort of peace. But all the way through, there are these relationships with these 12 tones that and bringing in Korean instruments and Chinese instruments, Japanese. I mean, he brings in all kinds of timbres that you'll hear me play with a plectrum, and he does that in the concerto too, where I'm emulating other instruments, and so everything is incredibly organized. His imagination is, really fantastical, but he just sort of goes to the extreme of an individual voice being heard in the wilderness or in this cacophony of noise all around us. And so the way you describe listening to the concerto, over the last 24 hours, that's sort of what you have to do with Isang Yun. You have to give it that kind of engagement to really fully get what he's after, and then it starts to sound like a piece. But on first hearing, for sure, it can. I'm sure it can seem chaotic.
We wanted to take 2 or 3 questions before, so if anybody has any questions.
I have one. How do you spell the last name of the composer?
Yun, Y-U-N.
Thank you.
But we don't know whether it's Yun Isang or Isang Yun, so I always just say Isang Yun.
Yeah, because I can't find it.
You can't go wrong if you say
Yeah.
Isang.
I Googled them, but I can't find it. I tried.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not surprising.
I don't know what happened to this cello. Can you, in a nutshell, talk about
What happened to it?
cello?
Well, okay, you want to leave the room and I'll tell them what happened?
Sure, actually, I do.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. You want to
No, go ahead and tell it.
Yeah, it was a horror show. He explained it to me as he was with a student, and he was getting up and he tripped, and he could make a decision of his body or his instrument, and he decided that an instrument could be repaired and the body, might not be able to be repaired. And that was but it landed face first. The bridge collapsed through the front of it. The neck broke. Total disaster. And if you read this article, it's about, when I talked to him as he was driving, I'm glad he's not here. When I talked to him when he was driving down, it was, he's had this instrument for 30 years. And there are these famous stories like Yo-Yo Ma leaving his cello in a cab. It's an appendage. I mean, the only thing I'm not a musician, but the only thing I can compare it to is that moment of sheer terror where you can't feel your wallet in your back pocket. For those of you who carry wallets. I don't know what that kind of feeling is like, and it's probably not good to think about right before you. Maybe it's a joyous thing to think about.
What did you tell them?
I told them it was fine, and you weren't impacted at all, and you took it.
Yeah, it was in two pieces. Oh, did you
Yeah,
tell them? Oh, you told them.
I'm curious as to how it's braced originally and how that compares to how they make cellos today, and ladder bracing, X bracing, I don't know.
Bracing?
That braces inside that support the front,
the
top, and
the sound post and the bass bar and
any bracing that supports the top.
To my understanding, they basically reconstructed it, right? I mean, it's,
the cello, it wasn't that. They had to redo, but it wasn't because of my accident. In fact, the top had just the curvature, was lost basically, and they had to reshape it. So they made casts, with 3 casts to reshape the instrument and the top, and they had 4 or 5 people working on every aspect of the cello. It was just taken apart, and it was like, critical care unit. They were just it was on life support for 15 months basically, with 4 or 5 cello doctors, at it.
Had it dried out? Had it dried out?
No drying or anything. It was just taking care of every crack. Everything had to be redone, because once you open the instrument, it's, well, if you've ever been through a home renovation, you start to discover, once you open the floorboards, you start to discover that, there are issues. And so that's what happened. It was like a domino effect with the instrument. So.
What's the original history of the instrument?
Well, it's interesting. It's from Venice. Matteo Goffriller he is one of the great cello, especially cello makers. He's got violins and violas too, but he's famous for his cellos. And Pablo Casals played a Goffriller, Janos Starker played a Goffriller, and many soloists kind of gravitated over Stradivarius. We gravitate sometimes to the Goffriller, especially for its deep bass sound. And so this was made in 1710, and I like to think, because of the shape and it's not as big as some of the other Goffriller cellos, I like to think that perhaps it was commissioned by Vivaldi for the Ospedale, where Vivaldi was teaching. He was teaching girls at a girls' school, and so I like to think this is a girl cello. Maybe it was commissioned by Vivaldi. I don't know. Who knows? But it was in Venice of that time, and with these great composers and great makers, hundreds of makers. They were exporting instruments to all of Europe. People were ordering them from Venice, from Cremona, from Rome, from Bologna. I mean, all over Italy. But Venice was one of the big centers of instrument.
and you got it as a teenager?
I got it. I was using the Pablo Casals Goffriller for a few years as on loan, and under the condition that I had to return that cello the minute I found my own and could afford my own. So I was doing everything possible not to like any other cello. And then I was in London, and I came across this one and just fell in love with it. And one thing led to another, and it's got an interesting story, but then we'll be here all night now. I'm not the particulars.
All right. Well, love.
Yeah.
All right, please take it away.
All right. Do you want to talk about this next piece? Partita 2? Oh,
Well,
no, okay. So I think this is going to become an annual tradition in Salem that I play Philip Glass's Partita 2 every year. But hopefully it'll be better this time than a year ago because I had more time with it. By the way, it's a very good deal today on CDs. The Isang Yun, it was just released yesterday, and so those are freshly. You can smell the plastic and ink. No, but we're very proud of not only the album, it's a 2 CD set of. So you get a whole complete picture. It's a composer portrait, really, of Isang Yun. So you get the violin concerto, the cello concerto, recorded live with a colleague that both Richard and I are very close with, Dennis Russell Davies, a close friend of Philip's as well. And in fact, this program is kind of a Dennis Russell Davies program. I mean, because he introduced me to Isang Yun, and we recorded also the second cello concerto together live at Philip Glass.
does anyone know, do you guys know who Dennis Russell Davies is? Have you ever heard of him? See, this is one of the great tragedies, because he's from Toledo, Ohio. And he's had positions in the United States like St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, the Cabrillo Festival for Contemporary
He
Music.
founded the American Composers Orchestra.
He co-founded the Carnegie Hall's American Composers Orchestra.
Cabrillo, maybe he founded Cabrillo.
He was he was first music director of the Cabrillo Music Festival, but he, since the early 80s, has basically held music directorships in Europe, including, he's one of the Stuttgart Chamber Orchestra, he's one of the 3 people ever to have recorded every Haydn symphony. This recording is done with the Bruckner Orchestra at Linz, Bruckner's hometown. And he's the type of guy, he's very gruff and, I mean, straightforward American. He's like the most American guy, but he's basically living in exile. He wouldn't say that, it's not even fair to say that, but we were talking today about the bravery in terms of programming, but his worldview is, I was saying this today, it's Kusevitskian, where the Boston Symphony is remembered for being the orchestra that commissioned Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra or Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms. And not to be unfair, but those were kind of the glory days. I don't know what has been done since then. So to give you an idea, I don't think any American has the kind of experience. He's conducting Salome at the Vienna State Opera this year. Americans don't know who he is, other than he's the guy who's commissioned 11 of Philip Glass's symphonies. He's almost solely responsible for that. But in the same breath, he's the guy who will introduce Matt, an American, to Isang Yun. And again, it's the kind of openness that I wish were around more. But ultimately, I think he's the type of person who will be remembered.
So yeah, I guess, but I was talking about CDs, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he curates the 2 CD set. So anyway, you're not going to find a better price than
That's right.
today. And also, once you hear Phil Glass's second partita. Hopefully you'll check out that one as well on Orange Mountain. Orange Mountain is the only other record label that I record for, actually. So I kind of record for our own label, Oxengill Records, since 2000. And we have a wonderful partnership with Pentatone, who's a Dutch label based in Amsterdam, and they've made our music available in Europe and Asia and all over the place. But I feel very close to Richard and Orange Mountain and what you guys do.
And can I say one more thing? I mean, you know, we didn't talk about this, but the sort of issue of being a high operating musician is that, Matt, if you had chosen a different life path, this is somebody who could be in the Berlin Philharmonic. This could be, you know, at a certain point, not for everybody. My life has been luck, but
I actually was thinking that I would have liked to go up in front of the Supreme Court and
yeah.
I should become a lawyer.
If we could do it all over again. No, but I mean, you know, what triggered this was he said he records for his label and Pentatone and my label, Orange Mountain Music. With that said, he's not mentioning that he was recorded extensively for Deutsche Grammophon, including recordings with the Chicago Symphony. And who doesn't mention that type of thing? You know, so it just all adds up to my my gratitude for your being here. So thank you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for coming. And here's Partita 2.
Mm-hmm.
You all like Bach? The Prelude of the Third Suite. Which has one of the great great pedal points in music. This sort of most important relationship of dominant to tonic, 5/1. This is kind of an epic five here when that Bach arrives to. And this probably.